Blessings, dear friends. It's Wednesday, January 27th, 2021. What will be following is a recording of a presentation given by the Ministry and Spiritual Life Working Group of Permanent Board to Ministry and Council over 2 weekends in October and to Permanent Board for its October business meeting. You will hear from the members of the Spiritual Ministry and Spiritual Life Working Group. They are myself, clerk of the working group, Nancy Middleton of Putney Meeting, Hugh MacArthur of Hanover Meeting, Nia Thomas of Northampton Meeting, Noah Merrill of Putney Meeting, and Phil Fitz, who worked with us during the first phase of our discernment. He is of Northampton Meeting as well. Permanent Board has approved of the direction of this presentation, and we are recording it today for informational purposes as the work that's outlined in this presentation moves forward. Thank you. And first, we will hear from Nancy Middleton.
Greetings, friends. We begin with gratitude. Thank you. Thank you. With the deepest humility and gratitude, we thank you. There is a really long list of many friends and roles who have been part of this discernment. We celebrate friends' service in the past, which in so many ways has brought us to this moment. And we especially care for those who have given so much in service. We acknowledge Phil Fitz of Northampton Meeting and the vital role he played in this foundational work. Noah will introduce how our work has unfolded.
So in our presentation, we'll be sharing about 3 things. The first is about how we got to this point. The second is about what we heard as a working group in this process of listening, discernment, and consultation, acknowledging our condition, an affirmation about our condition, and some things we hope we'll remember as we go forward. And based on all of this, we'll share a vision that emerged in our work and our recommendation for a next step that we might take together. This verse from 1 Corinthians is a reminder to us that we as this working group and we as friends in New England seeking to nurture ministry are not the first to have wrestled with these questions, that we're part of a living tradition of seeking to be faithful in stewarding gifts for the building up of the body as a whole. We're reminded that we need everyone in this service, that there are varieties of gifts, and that nurturing gifts is about shared suffering and shared joy. That we nurture ministry for the common good, for friends and for the world. And now Sarah is going to share a little more about how we got here.
In response to the recommendations of the Clerking Structures and Practices Working Group, Sessions 2019 directed Permanent Board with the support of Ministry and Council to establish the Ministry and Spiritual Life Working Group. The working group was formed at a joint meeting of Ministry and Council and Permanent Board in September of 2019. The working group was called to begin its work in December of 2019. The working group has presented in person and or in writing to each meeting of Ministry and Council, Permanent Board, and sessions since its formation. Our approved charge is to explore where and how support for ministry and spiritual life currently happens among New England friends, and to offer recommendations for structures, practices, and leadership roles that would best serve the current needs of Friends. While our name is the Ministry and Spiritual Life Working Group, I need to acknowledge that over and over again in our listening and discernment, we heard that eldership is an inextricable part of nurturing ministry and spiritual life among us. The recommendations that you will hear were shared over 2 consecutive weekends in October with Ministry and Council before they were brought to Permanent Board. And now I'd like to say a little bit about our process. Our process was grounded in worship and prayer. Because members of the working group were not well known to each other, we began with our spiritual journeys to better understand what we brought to this work spiritually. Our process was grounded in the direct experiences of the working group members. Some of the experience present on the working group was that we represent current and past service on New England Yearly Meeting Ministry and Council, experience as clerks and members of our monthly meeting ministry and council committees, service through local meeting ministry and oversight committees. We have served on the oversight of those ministers who have traveled among us and served in public ministry over years, exercising gifts in eldership and wider service within New England Yearly Meeting and other yearly meetings. Our process was grounded in what we have learned from previous work. Most especially, I want to hold up that among us, we read over 60 years of minutes from the yearly meeting and from ministry and council in particular. We were informed by the We Need a Plan document, from the work of the Structural Review Committee, and from the Clerking Practices and Structures Working Group. And our process was grounded in listening. We held focus groups with over 30 friends from diverse backgrounds, experiences, and identities over many hours. Among the friends who were involved in those Zoom calls, I want to hold up that the list of practitioners invited to the discernment calls was not exhaustive, but we hope that it was widely representative. Among those included were past and present members of ministry and council, including 5 former clerks of yearly meeting ministry and council. More than half of the currently appointed members of ministry and council, past and current clerks of monthly meeting ministry and councils, those who carry travel minutes, those who are paid pastors, recorded ministers, seminarians, those who see themselves primarily as elders, employees of Quaker organizations, our published writers, those with powerful vocal ministry, and those whose ministry bears fruit in active witness. We listened. How did we focus our attention? First, consistent with our charge, we focused on the particular role of the yearly meeting as an organization, asking, how can the yearly meeting support local meetings in nurturing those called to ministry and to eldership? Secondly, what can the yearly meeting in particular help to happen that local meetings cannot do alone? And thirdly, where might the yearly meeting contribute as part of the wider ecosystem of support for ministry, eldership, and spiritual life. And now we'll turn to Noah.
So here's some of what we heard in that listening, in that discernment. First, a reflection on our condition. We want to begin by affirming the grief that we heard about the prospects of loss, of losing how it used to be or how things used to work. In the perception of past shortcomings or a sense of failure, grief in a sense of lost opportunities for faithfulness or of distance from God's dream for us. And then we heard a deep feeling and commitment and care that friends bring and have brought to this service, past, present, and that we will bring in the future. So the second aspect of our condition that we heard is devotion. And the third aspect of our condition that we want to lift up is a deep yearning that friends have to more fully celebrate, support, and liberate gifts of ministry and eldership, to nourish the life of the Spirit in our hearts, in our meetings, and in the world. We also heard an affirmation that change is needed in how the yearly meeting supports and nurtures ministry and spiritual life. So we want to leave you with that simple affirmation. And now Nia is going to share some more about what we heard.
So in our listening, we heard a lot about local meetings. We heard that even though ministry is nurtured in many ways among friends in New England, including in ways that exist beyond local meetings, such as at youth retreats, within spiritual friendships, and in service beyond the yearly meeting and the monthly meeting, we were particularly reminded throughout our listening of the essential role that local meetings play, and that it is we particularly were reminded of the essential role that local meetings play in the sustainable and fruitful nurture of ministry. At the same time, we know that meetings are diverse in the needs, contexts, and capacities, as well as in the particular gifts and practices present now. We heard it acknowledge that local meetings often struggle to recognize that people are gifted in different ways and need different kinds of nurture for those gifts. And we heard that meetings need help in, could you just show the other circles, Noah? We heard that meetings need help in strengthening their capacity to more fully include and support the diversity of friends' identities, experiences, and kinds of gifts. As friends tending to the wider web of faithfulness among friends in New England, we need to meet each meeting where it is at and encourage next steps. We need to make sure we don't bypass local meetings and leave them to languish. That we don't focus too much on new initiatives, activities, or individual ministries to the exclusion of caring for the spiritual health of local meetings overall. We need to hold and honor these dynamics that you see on the slide here, representing local meetings, as we support thriving ministry and spiritual life, which we yearn to be well-rooted in local meetings.
We heard again and again that as a yearly meeting seeking to support ministry and spiritual life, that we're trying to do too much. And that in trying to do it all, we can lose focus and grounding for the few things that may be most essential. We heard that we need to foster a cultural shift, not simply a structural one, in how the yearly meeting encourages spiritual life and ministry, and that we can create new tools in response to needs as we go. We don't have to have all the answers to get started. that the shift is, again, primarily about culture and not primarily about structure, that those new tools, meaning structures and roles and practices and functions, can be developed and discovered as we go. We know that we're already doing a lot of the current work that overlaps with historical work of the Committee on Ministry and Council in other ways, including pastoral care consultations, the Nurturing Faithfulness program, and other kinds of work. So this is about fostering a cultural shift and discovering what's needed, learning as we go. We heard three things that we hope we'll remember. The first, practice, not perfect. We can get caught up in trying to have all the answers settled before moving on at all. Or we can tend to spend years admiring the problem while the spiritual health of our communities suffers. The key message here is that there is no shortcut to learning how to more fruitfully nurture ministry and spiritual life. We'll learn to nurture ministry and spiritual life by nurturing ministry and spiritual life, imperfectly, partially, and through sustained practice, through taking risks and trying new things, through experimenting and making mistakes, and then learning and trying again. The second thing we hope friends carrying this work forward will remember is that this is about nurturing gifts. Naming gifts is not enough. It's not enough to recognize that people are called to ministry. We need to grow our capacity to nurture gifts of ministry throughout the life cycle of vocation, from the initial inklings of a call to the laying down of the work and everything in between. This isn't only about affirming people. It's about learning to journey together in relationship, reining each other in when we've outrun our guide, and challenging one another to greater faithfulness. Different kinds of support and accountability will be needed for different gifts at different times. The essential thing is about praying into the gift together to discern what's needed. And here we need to be specific. We heard strongly affirmed through many voices the particular need in this moment to focus explicitly on nurturing gifts of preaching, of vocal ministry, and of teaching, that is, religious education about Quaker theology and spiritual practices. We hope this clarity will be taken to heart and carried forward by all of us in the time to come. And again, that affirmation is not because those gifts are in some absolute sense more important than any others, but because we heard friends affirm the deep need at this time in the life of friends in New England and the life of friends for us to give attention to the nurture of those gifts of preaching and teaching. And the third affirmation that we want to emphasize is a focus on the fruits as we carry this work forward. So by fruits, we mean the evidence of thriving in the lives of specific people and in the lives of specific local meetings. That we need to keep returning to our focus, not redesigning our structures or on making better plans or on spending too much time arguing about the way the nurture of ministry should be done. We heard that at the heart of things, we aren't trying to build a better ministry machine or some sort of structure that will run on its own. Remember, we're practicing, not perfecting. Instead, imagine that we're learning to tend and harvest a garden. And when we tend the garden, while there are many things that need doing, we have to keep bringing our attention back to the life that's growing and to what's needed to nourish it in order to reap the harvest, or the dry ground yields no food, or the good food rots on the vine. Either way, the people starve. So we're invited to keep our focus on the practical effects of our labor, on bodies and souls. The work of ministry is about helping everyone to be fed. And now Hugh is going to share more about what we heard, about transformation and about vision.
We are seeing that everyone is to be fed and led. We need to be mindful that this change will take place in God's time. But we need to take first steps, prayerfully reflecting, trusting, knowing we will be guided if we keep listening. The important thing is to begin. As we journey, how will we recognize success? What might thriving look like? What evidence of bearing fruit might we see? We invite you to close your eyes and perhaps image the caterpillar, the chrysalis, and the butterfly, and that transformative process that we are describing, and listen to a vision we heard of thriving.
Through the thriving of gifts and ministry given to New England Friends, the reign of heaven would be more fully expressed in our region and in the wider world. As an essential part of our life together, Friends in New England would consistently and joyfully expect, recognize, call out, name, and nurture gifts in ministry. Friends would affirm and recognize a wide range of forms that ministry can take, including both expressions that primarily build up the spiritual life of the religious society of Friends, and those that foster primarily hope, inspiration, challenge, healing, and transformation in the wider world. Friends would be able to recognize that distinct expressions of ministry require distinct forms of support and nurture and oversight, both at different stages of the ministry's life and because of the distinct vocation to which each friend is called.
Friends of many backgrounds, life stages, and circumstances and identities would serve in ministry. A recognition that growth in ministry is a developmental process, that friends can grow in their gifts through experience and faithful service over time, would be paired with an acknowledgement of the need for experimentation, risk-taking, and mentoring that lifts up the efforts of those less experienced alongside more seasoned friends. Opportunities to explore support and service in ministry would be accessible and widely known to friends throughout our region.
Because of their participation in their local meetings and those meetings' capacity to support ministry, friends would have a clearer sense of their own gifts and the gifts of others in their meetings, and of how they work together in the ministry of the whole. Celebration and recognition of gifts in one person would be seen as a blessing to the whole community. Meetings would understand their role and responsibility in stewardship of the gifts in their members, and members would understand their responsibility to be faithful in the exercise of their gifts for the good of the meeting community and the world.
People, both inside Friends communities and beyond, would identify the nurture and oversight of ministry as a core element of what it means to practice the Quaker tradition. Friends called to ministry would be challenged to greater boldness and fuller expression of their gifts, and would be able to receive healthy oversight that realigns or corrects their course when they are outrunning the guide. Humility, courage, and reverence would be evident in Friends' exercise of ministry. The life of Friends communities would bear witness to the infinite love of God.
But in our listening, we also heard that there are some obstacles to this vision being realized. To summarize them, some meetings are unable, unwilling, or resistant to name, nurture, and hold accountable those called to ministry. There are distractions from nurturing ministry, eldership, and spiritual life. Conversations about nurturing ministry are often abstract rather than grounded in practical needs and present experiences. And ministry and counsel of the yearly meeting has been overburdened by administration and unnecessary responsibilities.
So our recommendation, after months of work and hours of listening and discernment, is to open space for new life. For those who have been tracking the work of the working group over these months, prior to our Zoom consultations, the working group had a 30-page document of history, analysis, 7 recommendations with supporting structures. What we heard again and again clearly, was the call for not more structure or different structure, but first to open space for new life, to let transition take its time, supported and in good order. The way that we will open space for new life and live into this practice is through meetings for ministry and spiritual life. What would change? First, what we're envisioning is a meeting, not a committee. The work would be worship-based and worship-filled, with space for listening and openings, not to-dos. What we are envisioning are hosted seasonal gatherings of friends in autumn, winter, and spring. We imagine warm welcome to those currently serving on ministry and council and new participants with no formal appointment necessary. We anticipate that at these gatherings there will be peer support. In addition, and most importantly, what would happen at these gatherings would be release from those participating in the administrative burdens and formal decision makings, such that the focus of these gatherings is living into ministry and eldership, revitalized and speaking to us now. What would happen at these meetings? Meetings would be hosted by the interim clerk of ministry and council, supported, I think we're on the next slide.
Shall we show this one?
I think we did that one. Oh,
Fully displayed.
we did not. I'm sorry. Oh, what would we do at these meetings? We would worship together. We would hold space for those actively engaged in ministry and its nurture, especially in local meetings. We would nurture relationships. We would reflect on the current practice of ministry, the work of elders, and the spiritual life of local meetings. We would honor the challenges of this work as practitioners actually engaged in the work. We would share upcoming opportunities to nurture ministry and spiritual life. We would celebrate how friends are experimenting, building capacity, and being faithful. And now Noah will speak to how this would happen.
Thank you, Sarah. So these meetings on ministry and spiritual life would be hosted by the interim clerk of ministry and council, supported by a group of friends, hopefully who will be watching this recording, who together would set the table for these meetings. This group of 5 to 6 hosts would be nominated and approved by the permanent board based on their having demonstrated the gifts and experience needed to ensure this work is carried forward with intention, consistent with the vision offered here. And since the approval of these recommendations, a fuller description of the charge of this working group and of the gifts needed has also come forward and has been and will be shared with friends stepping into this work. The fruits of this experiment would be reflected on after each gathering. Regular reports would be offered to permanent board and to sessions, and the practice would be reconsidered in 2022. But wait, many friends might be asking, how will we do some of the work that has been laid on ministry and council, or has historically been work that has been the charge of the ministry and council committee, at least for several years? How would we care for worship at annual sessions and ensure that those meetings for worship are held and that the grounding of worship is fundamental to annual sessions? How would we support yearly meeting-wide discernment on weighty concerns, which has sometimes been a responsibility the ministry and council has been asked to take up? And how will we respond to pastoral care concerns in local meetings? Thankfully, a number of friends have been exploring this work, and there are a number of ways this work is already being done. So we're in this presentation just affirming that work is being given attention and care, and how that might go forward. And as of this recording, friends are holding these aspects of that work in a variety of different ways. Well, part of what we would continue about our current practice is that during the planning for sessions, the interim clerk of ministry and council, the yearly meeting secretary, and the sessions clerk and others would consult to ensure vital roles are filled in the care for sessions. There would be a new role of worship coordinator for sessions planning created, focusing on consistency and continuity in care of worship, ensuring elders for speakers, care for sacred space, and supporting friends in holding the memorial meeting. And as of this recording, that work is underway. How we could support yearly meeting-wide discernment going forward. We would continue the practice now happening in several places of appointing resource groups to support and shepherd monthly meeting and quarterly meeting discernment under the care of the permanent board, with integration and support and partnership from staff and volunteer leadership. One example of that is the way that, as of this recording, the Right Relationship Resource Group is supporting meetings in engaging with discernment of the draft letter of apology to Native peoples on behalf of friends in New England. How would we respond to pastoral care concerns from local meetings? We would continue the practice of having a pastoral care coordinator and team as part of annual sessions, and continue the current practice of having pastoral care resource people who are available to support meetings in their own with their own needs, in partnership with friends holding these concerns more widely. And we would continue the practice of regularly setting the table for what we might call peer circles of support for friends engaged in the work of pastoral care in their local meetings, so that those friends can connect with one another and nourish each other, share their experience, and encourage each other in their work.
But, excuse me, but what about the current form of ministry and council? What happens to that body? While we engage in this experiment, the current structure of this committee would be set aside to allow us to fully engage in the new practice that we are proposing. We will bring an update to sessions in 2021, just to let people know how this is working, what's being successful, what needs to be changed. And then a full discernment on our process would take place in 2022, again with sessions. Local meetings would be encouraged, indeed strongly encouraged, to send friends to these meetings on ministry and spiritual life based on the discerned needs and gifts in those monthly meetings. But they would not be asked to appoint formal representatives, at least for the time being. The yearly meeting nominating committee would also not be appointing members at large. Friends serving, and this is most important, on the part of ministry and council currently would be very much encouraged to participate in these meetings and invited to either move into new service or continue their historical service according to their gifts. This would be in regards to sessions, to pastoral care, visitation, etc. We need to make clear that, again, that the formal structure of ministry and council would be set aside during this experiment, but this process would be reconsidered in 2022. And there's always time to go back, if needed, to our previous practices.
So what are the next steps? A hosting group approved by the permanent board and based on a wide call for nominations of friends who demonstrate needed gifts will work with the interim clerk of ministry and council to set the table for a first gathering in keeping with this proposed vision. Our expectation is that a first meeting on ministry and spiritual life could be organized for spring of 2021. And in keeping with the spirit of experimentation, reflections on the gathering and on their fruits would be collected and shared in an ongoing way, allowing for shared learning, for celebration, and for continuing discernment.
So friends, here's what we hope, some of what we hope you heard in this presentation. We hope you heard the deep grief, devotion, and yearning that we heard defining the condition of friends as we move into this new experiment, to this new time. We hope you heard that we can both honor our traditions and the experience of friends over many years of service, and that we also need to welcome newcomers and friends of younger generations into this work. We hope you heard that we all have a part to play in nurturing ministry for the thriving of friends and the healing of the world. We hope you heard that there is a cost, both in choosing change and in choosing not to change, and that we hope friends will continue to hold that trade-off and that recognition as our work goes forward. And that there is a focus for these gatherings on this shift in culture toward discovering in practice, toward nurturing and naming gifts, toward focusing on the fruits of the life in the ministries of friends and of the thriving of local meetings. We hope you heard that we're part of a continuing journey as we discover our way forward, surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses in this work, discovering learning, making mistakes, finding our way forward as we go. That we need cultural change in how we support and nurture ministry and spiritual life. Those who serve in ministry and eldership in our wider friends communities. That we can practice and learn as we go. And the invitation that we share while we're always beginning again, that this is an opportunity to begin this work anew. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being willing to be part of this work. And thanks for joining in the journey.